Hello, I'm Jennifer Nichols. I'm a teacher, an artist, and a fabric designer, and I have a ton of classes on Skillshare. I absolutely love teaching people how to use Procreate and all sorts of different things that we can do. I have a bit of an obsession with repeat patterns and also brush making. So I'm excited to show you a repeat pattern today, and this one is special in that it will keep your background separate from your art, so you can choose a whole bunch of different colorways later and have all sorts of options for your background. I'll be showing you how I made this Luna moth illustration. If you want to follow along with the stamp brushes that I used, you'll need to sign up for my newsletter over on my website, and it's a free download. And while you're over there, grab a couple more free brush sets. So on my website, just go to the newsletter section. I really don't send a lot of emails. I just started this actually, and I only plan on sending 1 or 2 a month. So make sure you check your junk mail. There'll be a confirmation email, and there'll also be a welcome email, and that will have the downloads in it. But also go to the brush section and grab the Spoonflower blog brushes and my 5 free favorite brushes. And then down at the bottom here is a little bit of information on how to download those if you're not familiar with that. These are some of my very favorite brushes for illustrating, so I find them very useful in most of my illustrations. While I'm here, I want to also point out that on Instagram in my IGTV, I have a lot of other lessons. So this lesson will show you how I illustrated the Luna moth design. We're not going to do a full illustration today because it'll take too long, but I'll show you how to get to the point and the whole process for completing an illustration that is a repeat pattern. This one's not, obviously, but we're going to talk about it as a repeat pattern today. Go ahead and start a canvas that is square and 300 dpi. Depending on your iPad, you'll want to make it about 10 inches or 12 inches. If you have about 20 layers, that should be enough. So the first thing you need to know to really start laying out your initial design is where the midlines are. So turn on the drawing guide, go to your wrench tool, canvas, drawing guide, and it defaults to the 2D grid. Edit the drawing guide, and you can go ahead and just keep that grid, 2D grid on, but make the size max. I'm going to go ahead and change my opacity and thickness as well as the color of my line, just to make it easier to see on camera. These are important because the first step we do in turning this into a repeat is essentially like cutting here and here. So we need to add any design elements along these lines before we cut. We can't add anything to those lines after the initial step of digitally cutting those, I guess would be a good way to phrase that. Another thing you need to keep in mind is since Procreate crops at the edges, you can't have anything crossing the edge. You can't have anything that's cropped because it won't repeat down here. And there are some ways to carefully go off the edge, and I talk about those in my other Skillshare classes. I have 3 other classes on repeat patterns. I have a lot of information out there. So we're not going to go into that today. Just know that everything we're doing, we're going to make sure we're not going over the edge. You can touch the edge, but you can't go over the edge. So if you go to the Spoonflower blog brushes and go to the 6B pencil, that's just my preferred sketch pencil. You can choose anything you want. The first thing you're going to want to do is think about where your vines are going to be. And remember, we're only focusing on these midlines. We don't want to make it look like a plus sign when we're done with this step, but we do need to focus on those lines a little bit. So I'm going to kind of make a curve here and a curve here. And those will be my starting curly branches. So if you've taken any of my classes, this is similar to my curly branches lesson in my advanced repeat pattern class. So once I have kind of the base for where I want my vine, I don't need the vine over here because I'm going to add one of the moths over here. So I have my base, and now I'll go to a new layer, go to my stamps, and start figuring out where I want my stamps. I'm going to turn snapping off so I have more control over that, remembering that I can't go off the edge. And also remembering that I'm trying to focus on that midline, and I'm going to keep repeating myself here. Overlapping is perfectly fine. I like going to new layers each time I put a stamp down, just so I have more freedom to move it around without having to select it. So that's just up to you. That's my process. I'm going to overlap that vine there. So I don't want to just place everything along this vertical line and everything along this horizontal line, but I am thinking about anything that I might want to have that is touching that line. So continue like this. The leaves are fun to just flip around. So if you go to a new layer, you can flip them around and get them into position. If you look at some moonflower photos, you'll see these leaves sort of drape off of the vine. So you can come back to the vine layer and go back to your 6B, and they kind of, the stems kind of curl off down like that. Tap and hold the eraser if it makes more sense to you in your brain to have these erased, because the vine is going to be under the butterfly there, moth, and under the leaf here. You can go through and erase these. I like to leave a little bit visible so I know where I'm drawing my final vine when I'm illustrating. And then another thing you can do at this stage is add little tendrils, because this is a climbing vine. And that's a nice way to fill in some gaps. Once you're done with all of your sketch, you can merge it. I'll show you my final sketch for this first stage now. So I've focused on my midlines here, and I've left these areas blank because those will end up merging into one big space in the center. I've also gone pretty close to the edges because I can't add anything to those gaps. So this gap and this gap will join into one bigger gap, and so will these once we move this around in a second here. So if I feel like this gap is a little too big, maybe I can add a little curly Q there, something like that. So I have all of my sketch on one layer, and I just need to add little corner marks. By adding corner marks, I'm forcing Procreate to copy the entire canvas, because it will only copy to the edge of where you have pixels on the canvas. If I didn't have corner marks, it would only copy to right here and so on. So now I have top, right, bottom, and left edges covered with a little bit of ink. Nothing's touching any of the artwork, so that works great. And now I just, because it's all on one layer, I'm going to delete the example I showed you. Because this is all on one layer, all I need to do is duplicate it. I don't need to turn off the background, and I need 5 of them. So I need to have one reserved for later. I'm going to just turn it off. If they weren't all on one layer, all you would need to do is turn the background off, even if you had 5 layers making up your sketch. If you have one of those layers that has corner marks on it, turn the background off, 3-finger swipe down, copy all, and then go to, the paste will go right above wherever your layer is selected, and then 3-finger swipe down and paste. And then it would give you exactly what we just did, because that was a bad example since it was already all on one layer. But that is how you keep your background separate. So now I can turn my background back on, and I have all of these layers that are, you can see the blue is not showing. They're independent of the background. So now I have one of them turned off to save for later. And I'm going to take each one of these and move the full-sized image to the 4 corners. I'm going to delete this extra one that I made here. So I have these 4, one goes to each corner. To do this, It'll probably work since you have your corner marks and you don't have any other layers on. It'll probably work just fine to keep your other layers on at this point. If snapping is not easily working for you, you need to just turn off all your other layers and work on one layer at a time. So let's go ahead and select one. And what you're going to see is this corner is going to slide down to here, and it's going to be our new bottom left corner. This corner is going to slide up to there, so we're essentially cutting these and moving them around. Also, when you have things selected like this, if you tap on the canvas, it will nudge the whole selection that direction, and that will mess up your entire design, so don't do that. Be very careful when you have a selection highlighted. Turn snapping on. I keep distance at max. Velocity is how fast you move your selection. I just keep it at the default, which is 5. And distance is just how close to the next object over do you want your selection to be before it tries snapping to it. I don't want it to try snapping to a whole bunch of different things, so I just keep it at max, so it's just going to do big chunks, snap, 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 instead of teeny tiny little snaps. So moving the full-size image, we're not shrinking anything, and you have to get these gold lines. And then deselect by either opening the layers or deselecting over here, and select another layer and move it to another corner, making sure you have the gold lines. Select another layer, move it to another corner. So I'm showing you how easy that should be because I want to make that very clear. If it's not that easy for you, then you need to just do one layer at a time. It should not be complicated. And then we have our 4 layers that we can merge right here. You can either erase or select the new corner marks that have now moved to the center and move them right off. So this is the start of your repeat. Your flower here is repeating over here, your moth is repeating down here, and so on. So now we just need to go to a new layer and fill in the rest. The same method goes for filling in the rest. So you can see where your vines have ended on your previous design are now, here. This one is kind of hidden behind this flower. You could choose to continue it, or you could choose to just keep it hidden back there and not have any more vines sticking out there. The first thing I would do is the biggest motif. So that would be another moth. I'm on a new layer. I would go ahead and figure out where I want my moth to be. Now this moth is facing this direction and up, so I definitely don't want this one to do the same thing. I could have it perpendicular. I don't think I would want it exactly perpendicular. And I do like the idea of having it over here and sort of in the middle so that they're offset. If you have it way down here, they're going to make a row. If you have it way over here, they're going to make a column. So this is just something to think about as you're placing your next set of flowers and designs. Once you're happy with that, you can continue to go to new layers and figure out, I would probably figure out where I want my vine next. So maybe this one can continue over like this. Make sure the curve is something that's fairly natural looking. And here's one that hid behind the flower here. I could have this come out like this. Something like that. Maybe make an ending leaf here or a little flower bud here. I, of course, have already finished this section. So I'll show you here what I've done. So I've just added, I extended this vine over here. I extended this vine up here. Added more leaves. I have some nice gaps. I stamped the moon stamp and removed 2 out of 3 of those and chose this one to illustrate and got it in a nice position here. If you want more than one moon stamp, I would probably figure out the position of this and then the position of your moons before figuring out the vines. Actually, we don't need the grid lines anymore, so we can turn those off. And now you're thinking, okay, I think I like this final sketch here, how can I be sure if I like it? Well, you're going to want to see it as a 2x2 of this same design. This is one complete repeat pattern for sure, the sketch of one. To really decide if you like how it's going to look, I would go ahead, you can do it with the background on or off. I would go ahead and make it 2x2, copy all, turn these off, and paste. Now I can turn the background back on, and I can just duplicate these until I have 4, select them all, and snap them right down. So this time we changed the size. Instead of sliding the full-sized images to the corners, we're just shrinking them down to the 4 corners. And now we're moving one up at a time, or one into each corner, I should say. Whatever method you like for that. And it snaps with the gold lines for all of that. Something that you should also think about is any curly design. If you have a really vertical or really horizontal section, it really stands out in this stage. You can kind of see it with even just this little white on the wing of that moth being so horizontal. That's the only thing that really stands out to me. I think these other curves aren't really having any long stretches that are perpendicular or horizontal or vertical. So it should be fine in the end. That won't stand out at all. But that's something to think about. And zooming out and really taking a look, the placement of the moths is really great because they're nice and scattered. The flowers are nice and scattered. There's no big area with a bunch of flowers and a big area without any flowers. The types of flowers where we've duplicated the stamp types, they're nice and dispersed, and it looks good. So once you are happy with your sketch, that's the time to move forward with your final illustration. To move forward with your final illustration, you can go ahead, if you have enough layers, go ahead and keep that. You might want it, but you don't really need to keep it. The ones you really need were the initial design and the design that fills in after you move that initial design to the 4 corners. So you need those 2 pieces of the sketch. From here, you could just use this as your sketch layer, reduce the opacity, and start working on some layers underneath it to illustrate. I would go with the vine on the bottom and the flowers and leaves on the top of that, and the moth on top of that. You could very easily illustrate your moth using turning your sketch off, for example, taking another moth, maybe making it a little bigger than you need it, center it. If you get the gold lines when you center it, that's perfect, and then come back into drawing guide, edit drawing guide, symmetry, and it defaults to this vertical symmetry. Use this as your sketch for your moth. Go on layers under it and turn on drawing assist and start illustrating your moth. Whoops, let's get a better brush here. Let's just pick a nice color. Start illustrating your moth with symmetry. And then once you have a completed moth, you would turn off the sketch, turn off the background, 3-finger swipe down, copy all, and paste it onto its own layer. And then you only have to draw that moth one time, and you can duplicate that and place it into position. So let me show you that on a different illustration here. So in this example, I didn't actually use symmetry for the moth, but I did illustrate it entirely on its own, turned off the background, 3-finger swipe down, copy all, and then go to another layer, 3-finger swipe down, and paste. And now I have that whole entire moth on one layer, and I can use it in my illustration. You're not going to want to do a lot of rotating because the quality gets diminished a little bit when you do a lot of rotating that's not 90 or 180 degrees, just because pixels are aligned a certain way. but it is a great way to not have to draw the moth twice. So here's an example of how I would illustrate this. I'm going to turn my moth off. I have a whole section that's just the vines and the leaves all separate. I have the leaves and the flowers on one layer with clipping masks on top. And then I have another group with the moth and all the moth layers. From here you can turn the background off and 3-finger swipe down, copy all. Notice that I didn't put any corner marks on. So you can do that at this stage before you do copy all, or you can do it on the very first one that you paste. So to keep these originals just free of corner marks, I left them alone. I'm going to turn both of those groups on. I can go ahead and turn my background back on, and I'll just pick a layer up here. It'll automatically paste one layer above whatever you're selected, whatever layer is selected. 3-finger swipe down and paste. So this is a good example of how if you don't have the corner marks, Procreate does not capture the whole canvas size. And the problem with that is when you're sliding this to the into the corners, or even when you're shrinking it down to a quarter size, it is going to go based on the edge here instead of the edge of the actual canvas. So we're going to deselect that. And now on this, so you can see it's all on one layer here. On this, I can go ahead and grab a brush and add some corner marks. That's it. And now I can duplicate that 4 times, just like we did in the sketch. Select, make sure snapping is on, and move it to the 4 corners. Whoops. Super easily. And now I'm not using my originals. If I were trying to do this with originals, of course that would be very difficult to do because there's so many layers in each one, but also I would be cropping my originals into these edge positions. So it's a great idea to just use the duplicates for this step. And you can merge those just like we did with the sketch layer and get rid of these corner marks. That's it. So that is the first step. The second step is bringing back your sketch of that inner layer here, the inner area. I don't have my sketch anymore because I deleted it earlier. So you would bring back your sketch and finish your illustration for this center area. And that is all right here. I have a duplicate on here. So I'm just going to turn this one off because this was just my example. So here I have one layer that is the outer layer I just showed you, and then all of this is how I finished the illustration. So once I had this on, I finished the illustration with all the other bits and pieces, and anywhere where I have something that is connected up. So for example, I have this little tendril touching this, and that layer is separate, right? So you just need to pay attention to those points and make sure you have them blend nicely, or they can hide underneath something. So for the moon, I have a couple of layers with the add blend mode, so that's giving it that glow. So to finish that center illustration, I have the moon, I have the flowers and the veins done in the same way, and then I just have the moth copied and pasted right there, just like we did down here. We have it on its own layer. You don't have to have a whole bunch of layers every time you do the moth. I have all the original moth layers down here. All right, so that's the final illustration. Because I have a blend mode here and I want to keep that glow look, I am sticking with this, and I'm not going to, well, you can check your pattern. You can go ahead and make a 2x2 of this pattern. But every time I make a finished version of this pattern, I'm going to do it at this stage right here so that I can keep the look of this glow. Because if you do a copy all and a paste, so copy all, and let's go ahead and turn all of that off and paste, the glow might look different It just depends on the blend mode. So here you can see it's quite yellow, whereas the original was more of a bright glow. So if you like that, you can just go ahead and stick with it. This is all basically normal blend mode now. So that's your choice. I'm going to go ahead and show you an example of how I would create more color versions, since we do have a separate background from our art. I'm going to show you how I would create more color versions in the 2x2 of this design. So we do have, before I do that, I'm going to jump back. So we do have this one that we just copied and pasted, and I want to go ahead and check my design. So I'm going to make 4 copies of that, shrink them down, whoops, shrink them down. They'll snap right to the center. I'm not getting the gold lines. So something happened. So if that happens, we're going to go back and try again. One thing you can check is making sure you have ink to all 4 edges. All right, and then I'm pretty sure nothing got nudged, so let's just try this again. So I turn my background layer off, copy all, turn this off, and paste. Make 4 of those, shrink them down, and now I have my gold lines in both directions. Weirdly, my pixel number keeps alternating between 1800 and 1801, which is very weird. It should just be 1800. Move 1 into each corner. I just do it this way. Turn your background back on and zoom in and check for gaps. I have a gap. There we go, I have a gap. So this pattern doesn't work as is because of that gap, and it goes all the way across. I don't have one going this way. So now we need to delete those. Those are bad. Bad, bad, bad. And we're going to see where this gap might be. Oh, it looks like it's up here. So that is this layer right here. So I'm going to delete it. This is good. Troubleshooting is good. I do have the one that we made down here just now. I can see that it goes all the way to the edge. If you are in light mode, there is a white line around the canvas. That isn't a pixel gap, so just keep that in mind. So this one that we just made, when I was showing you how to do this part, it looks like it's going to all 4 edges. So we're going to use this one. And I will just, you can bring it up to the group. It really doesn't matter if it's in the group or not. All right, let's try this again. Turn off the background. I like troubleshooting in classes because there's always people who come across these same issues. Copy all. Turn all of that off. I like collapsing it, collapsing the group into the smaller version just to be able to see the layers easier. Okay, so now let's try this one. I knew something was a little fishy when it kept saying, oh, I just made 5. When it kept saying 1801. Okay, I'm just turning the background layer back on so we can see a little better. And now I'm not getting that weird 1801 thing. I think we're good to go now. So I always move 2 up at the same time, and then I deselect one of those and reselect one of these and move those to the side. And now if we zoom in, find where our, see the gap is no longer there. And no gaps this way. And no gaps over here. So I can merge those 4, turn off my background, turn my background to a prettier color. And I like it. I actually really like the moon with this yellow glow, so I could just keep it like this if I want. I also like a texture overlay on top of things, so now would be a good time to add that. Because it's going to have a blend mode of its own, I don't want to do that before I do this copy paste that we just did. I don't want to have that texture layer on yet. So here's my texture layer, and you can see what a difference that makes. I'll zoom in. I just love it. That's all personal preference though. If you want to learn how to make full page seamless repeat textures, I have 2 classes. One is my Texture Brush 101 class, and that really goes into detail about seamless repeat textures. And then in my advanced repeat pattern class, I do a different version with an artist crayon brush, and it's a slightly different way of making them than the Texture Brush 101 class. So I just make a file with a whole bunch of these seamless textures. Here's one down here. This is actually a good way to show you why it's important to keep the background separate from your art as well. But I just keep a file with a bunch of textures, and I just go and copy and paste them into different things. And I always play with blend modes and color. The color of the layer itself and the blend mode both kind of play together. So having a artwork that's separate from your background also means that you can add a texture layer under your artwork, so it's only applying to the background, which you can see here, and it's not applying to the art itself. So that's a nice way to change up your texture as well, and that is also a seamless texture. So when those textures meet up on the sides and on the top and the bottom, you won't see any seams. So play around. I love some blend modes: linear burn, overlay, soft light, of course multiply and color burn. There's some favorites, and for blend modes it's really all about play. Okay, so that is how I would do that for checking my pattern. For checking the 2x2, I like keeping this version of the pattern, so from here I would go through and make new color versions of the pattern just by hitting export as a JPEG or PNG every time I find a color I like. And then come in, do another one, hit it again. The biggest downfall to having the option of having all these different background colors is knowing when to stop and figuring out which one's your favorite. So those are good problems to have, and you can make quite a few colors. All right, exporting all of those just like that. So that one was keeping my texture layers separate from my work. But we got lucky with that glow layer working, even though it is an add layer. So here's how you would do it if you don't have that much luck with your glowing layer looking good when you do that copy paste, if that makes sense. It's kind of looking funny right now. It's probably because the color is too light. So here we're back to the original. We're back to the group that has all of our layers and our glowing moon with our add layers, our add blend modes. And here I can go ahead and turn on my textures that I love. The one on top, the one below. I'm not loving that one with the dark blue so much. You decide. And then you can just go from here and pick the background colors that you like. So right now, this is a 1x1 of the seamless repeat. We know it repeats well because we just checked it. And now I want to choose my different color versions from this point. I've got all my textures on, and I can just do it straight from here by copying and pasting and having more layers up here. So let me show you that. Let me collapse this. So now we just go down here and come through, pick colors we like. I'm not a fan of that moon now with this color. I actually really liked the peach with the version we were playing around with up here. Where is it? Here. So that peach looked great on this version where the glow around the moon isn't on add, right? So there's another option to have a glow with a peach background. But if we're doing it at this stage, where we do have the add turned on, we need to find the colors that we like down here. I'm going to turn my texture layers back on. All right, so I like this color, so I can just either save it as a JPEG right now or do copy all and come up here above my texture layer, because I already have that texture layer applied right here, and I'm going to paste it above that. So now I have it. It's the background is attached to that image. And I can turn that off. I can come back down. I can find another color. Oh wow, that's really pretty. Some of these deeper red colors, and I'm looking at the browns and how the browns interact with the background as well. I like that color, so I'm going to 3-finger swipe down, copy all, and come up here above all my texture layers and paste. And I can do that every time I find a color that I like. So I'm going to turn all these off now. And now I can take my completed 1 by 1. Oh, I'm out of layers. So I can take my completed 1 by 1. I'm going to delete some layers here. Hopefully won't regret this later. I can delete that. I can make duplicates of it, shrink them down. Can I make a 5th one? I want a 5th one just to hold on to it as a 1 by 1 of the completed pattern. And I'm going to shrink down the other 4. Snapping is on, so it shrinks right into place. And I'm going to move 2 up and 2 over. Check your pattern, make sure you don't have seams like we did before, and shrink those. Now I have the 2 by 2 and the 1 by 1 sitting up here. I can export those to Spoonflower or wherever you like to do your patterns. And then I can go ahead and do the same thing with this blue one, which I don't have enough layers to do, so I won't do that. And that's it. Now to get the 2 by 2 of this pattern, you saw, of course, that we shrunk them. And the quality is still great. Procreate has gotten really good about quality and pixels and fuzziness. However, if you do not like to do that with that much shrinking, and you have an iPad that has a lot of layers, you can take your original, copy it, and go put it into a canvas that's twice this size. So this canvas is 7,200 pixels by 7,200 pixels at 300 dpi. And it is, the other one was 3,600 pixels. So now when you paste the other layer into this, you can see it just is half, right? So now we can snap it into the bottom. It is 1/4. So we're not shrinking anything. We are just moving the full images to the sides. Now I can go ahead and merge those two. It's slow because this size of canvas only gives me 6 layers. So things are really slow and they crash easily and things like that. I don't typically do it this way. I like just doing it all in one canvas, and I feel like the quality is still quite good. But that's one of the options I wanted to show you. And now you have a 2 by 2 that is not squashed. So they're the full 3,600 pixels by 3,600 pixels for each one of those. So pretty. I love this maroon background. Kind of a bricky. So these seamless repeat textures are also something that I give away in, well, I should say they are something I plan to give away in my newsletter freebies. I just started my newsletter, so I've only done the stamp brushes for the flowers and the moths and the leaves here. But I do make and give away brushes, textures, and palettes all the time on Instagram and Skillshare and my Facebook group. And so that's exactly what I plan to continue doing for my newsletter as well. And all of my Skillshare classes, once I started learning how to make brushes, I kind of go a little crazy. I love it. So I give them all away in my classes. I have a ton of brushes in some of my classes, and I hope you really enjoy them. So as you can see, I've got 4 classes now just on brush making. This is the one that will show you how to do full page texture seamless repeats, because that's what we use to make texture brushes. So I'd show you a few ways, even using some online textures and making them into seamless repeats as well. So if you're interested in learning when and how you can make patterns that go off the edges, I talk about it in the pattern brush class and also in my repeat pattern classes, actually all of them. So this one we talk about it a little bit. This is a pretty basic class. It's a great beginner class for repeat patterns. And the advanced pattern, one of the lessons in here is called curly branches, which is similar to what we did today, but we do it with birds and flowers in that one. The geometric repeat pattern class has probably the most information on going off the edges. So they are in a certain order for kind of skill level, but I do give you information that you need. Like if you haven't seen this class, you can still watch this class, for example. And then I have a spoonflower class because I like putting my stuff up on spoonflower. But yeah, I have a lot of other classes and I hope you enjoy. This is a simple design based on my beginner class where we learn about polka dots and just learning the basics of how to make a repeat. And this is similar to polka dots. So it's using the same method, but then I have a seamless repeat grid texture on that. So that makes it a little bit trickier. For this lesson, I used a technique from the advanced repeat class, the damask lesson, for getting these borders. This is a pretty fun lesson and it's not as tricky as it looks. Again, I don't go through full illustrations in my classes for the repeat patterns because I want the focus to be on the process. So this illustration is not in that class, but the style, the method that I use to get the shells here on the tops and the bottoms and the seaweed here is from the damask lesson. In my Instagram IGTV, I fumble through a really complicated scale pattern. And the reason this is complicated is because the scales overlap. So there's actually 3 lessons. So there's one that starts out as a different lesson and goes into this lesson, and then it finishes because I ran out of time. I started a second Instagram live and finished, but then because that all took so long, I recorded a quick little version of it and posted that as well. So you can just go to the rainbow one and you'll learn how to do something like this. Although this one I've got them all kind of weirdly off to the side, which is different from the actual rainbow lesson. This one is more of an Art Nouveau look with the wavy branches here. This is in my advanced repeat class as well. Here's one of several from my geometric patterns class. It is probably one of the funnest classes of the repeat patterns, although that's really hard to say because I love repeat patterns so much, like all the classes. But there's so much information in this class, and it's really great to have some geometric pattern abilities under your belt if you're trying to make coordinate patterns for your hero patterns and things like that. And then this one I did in my Instagram live, so it's in IGTV on my Instagram, another geometric pattern. I couldn't quite fit all of them into my class, so I've done several on Instagram as well. Another tricky one, but not once you figure out the tricks. I really hope you enjoyed class, and I can't wait to see what you make. I hope you tag me on Instagram, and I also have a Facebook group I run with Brenda Bacher, and we have a great time. It's a very safe and lovely place to post Procreate iPad art for all skill levels. Enjoy!